Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Please allow me to welcome you to our first inaugural plenary lecture for the Hildebrand Department Alumni-in-Residence program. My name is John Olson, and I'm the chair of the Hildebrand Department of Petroleum and Geosystems Engineering here at UT Austin. And on behalf of our students, faculty, staff, and alumni, I want to say that we are honored to have hosted Scott Sheffield for our first alumnus in residence this spring semester. The Alumni in Residence program is designed to offer our alumni a chance to make a meaningful and personal impact on our students, faculty, and staff by spending time on campus and sharing the secrets of their success. The insights provided by alumni like Scott, recounting their experiences of blending business and engineering, will provide vital entrepreneurial training for our students and faculty and will inspire engineers to reach their full potential. Let me tell you a little bit about Scott, who's going to be our speaker for today. Scott Sheffield is the CEO and chairman of Pioneer Natural Resources, one of the nation's largest and most successful independent oil and gas companies. He's a distinguished alumnus of the Hildebrand Department, and he's also a distinguished engineering graduate of the Cockrell School. Scott is the son of a petroleum engineer and grew up in the oil business, spending much of his youth in Tehran, Iran, as his dad worked in the oil fields there. He graduated from UT Austin with his bachelor's degree in petroleum engineering in 1975. And I also heard he was an integral part of the intramural football team, right? He went from UT Austin to join Aramco, now known as BP, then soon moved to Parker & Parsley Petroleum Company in Midland, Texas, working for another petroleum engineering graduate of the Hildebrand Department, Joe Parsley. He quickly rose to a leadership role and engineered Parker & Parsley's merger with Mesa Incorporated to form Pioneer Natural Resources, for which he was the founding CEO. He has earned numerous accolades for his leadership and contributions to the energy industry and to the communities in which he lived. Let me just mention two. He's received the Permian Basin Petroleum Association's prestigious Top Hand Award, which is recognition for leadership within the industry and also leadership within the Permian Basin community. Additionally, in Pioneer's headquarters city of Dallas, he received the Anti-Defamation League's Henry Cohn Humanitarian Award. Scott is a loyal supporter of UT Austin, the Cockrell School of Engineering, and the Hildebrand Department, and has been a generous donor of his time, talent, and treasure. Before I give Scott the floor, let me just say one thing. I really wasn't sure what it would be like to host the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company on our campus. I can report now, though, that my expectations have been wildly exceeded. Scott has been the most gracious, humble, capable, and flexible of guests. We've assigned him numerous tasks, from one-on-one meetings with students and faculty to speaking to our classes on industry and to giving this keynote lecture. He has embraced being our guinea pig for testing out how to implement an alumni in residence program, and he has truly connected with our students and faculty in a meaningful way that I am confident will bring them great success in the future. Thank you so much, Scott, for your generosity and dedication to your alma mater. Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Sheffield.
John, that was very gracious, and I want to thank you and your staff especially, both Catherine's, Gabby, Dory, and so you have a great staff. They're all very kind, so I appreciate everybody that helped over the 6 days. So I did also meet with most of the professors, so I enjoyed that too, talking to them about their programs and so on. And so obviously you can get a lot of questions from all the students. And so I really enjoyed that, sharing 40 years of experience. So I'm basically going to talk about the shale revolution and what it really means for this country and what it means for the world. And I mean, most of y'all that are either teaching or in petroleum engineering, it's probably been one of the greatest energy, probably one of the greatest revolutions, except the tech revolution. I don't think we get appreciated enough for it around the world, but I'll make some general comments about it. But it just, to finish my last, 10 years, even though I've come back to work, most of y'all know the last 8 weeks, but to finish my career with the shale revolution and what it did for the world, and most of it was in my backyard and in the Permian Basin. So if you look at this first slide, what's interesting is that we made a new comment. So this shows the largest fields in the world. In the field called Ghawar in Saudi Arabia has been the largest field. And what's amazing, Saudi Arabia just went to the public markets for the first time. It was Saudi Aramco. They had $100 billion worth of orders. So Saudi Arabia has raised public debt before recently, but Saudi Aramco went to the public markets just recently and raised $12 billion. They had $100 billion of orders for that $12 billion of public debt. So since they went to the public market, they've been historically very secretive of what their fields are doing. And so they had to disclose in that document that the largest field in the world is now down, and people thought it was around 5 million barrels a day. It's down around 3.8 million barrels a day. So now we can officially say the Permian Basin is basically the Wolfcamp and the Sprayberry zones are now the largest field in the world at 4.2 million barrels a day. And you can see a lot of y'all have worked at the Eagle Ford Shale. It's a 25 billion barrel field. When you put the Permian Basin plus the Delaware estimates on recoverable crude, this includes oil, gas, and NGLs. It puts both of them together over 150 billion. So it puts it right beneath Ghawar. So I would guess someday they'll both be larger than Ghawar. If you look at the next slide, it really shows you that where the Permian has come from. I don't give you the statistics here, but the Permian Basin was making about 800,000 barrels a day about 10 years ago. And now it's up, this shows 2.4 million barrels a day in 2017. It's up to 4.2 million barrels a day. And so the projections, I'll show you another projection in a minute. This is from McKinsey & Company showing the Permian Basin will be up to 6 million by 2025. It's already up to 4.2, but if you look at it, it's the fourth largest producer in the world at that point in time, bypassing Iran and Iraq. The reasons why the Permian Basin, it happens to be in a place where there's 4,000 feet of shale. So when I came here in 1972 to 1975 as a petroleum engineering student, I can promise you all the professors did not teach that you could produce oil out of shale. And so we knew it was the source rock, and over millions of years it would feed up into the sandstone and the limestones out in West Texas. And so we were producing wells for about 50 years, making 50 barrels a day. We realized the source rock is where most of the oil and gas is, and we learned how to fracture it. And so today we're making wells that come on about 2,000 barrels a day instead of 50 barrels a day. But if you look at that red and a well log resistivity, you can basically see we have about 4,000 feet of shale in the Permian Basin. You compare that to the Eagle Ford, about 300 feet, the Niobrara maybe 200 feet, the Bakken maybe a couple different stringers of about 100 to 150 feet each, and then the Marcellus, it's got a couple, 200-300 feet of gross pay. Now let's look at what's happened to production. You can see if you go back to 2007, you can look at the Permian Basin, the top line, about 800,000 barrels a day. It finally started taking off in about 2010, 2011, and the play really took off in 2014 and 15. And you can see the Permian is up to 4.2 million barrels a day. Most people don't realize it. It has 25% of the world's rig count in the Permian Basin. So 25% of all rigs in the world today are actually in the Permian Basin, mostly in the Midland Basin and the Delaware Basin. Now, what's also interesting on this slide, the Eagle Ford and the Bakken have had a turnaround. You can see they were drilled up very quickly. They got to their peaks in late 2014, early 15, and then Saudi decided to change the price of oil. And so we had a collapse at that point in time. And the Eagle Ford has made a comeback over the last 12 months. The Eagle Ford is climbing back, and also the Bakken is climbing back. They're both back up to about 1.5 million barrels a day. I'm not including gas. This is strictly oil. And you can see the Anadarko Basin in Oklahoma, the Scoop Stack play has come back a little bit, and then the Niobrara play in Colorado has come back also. They're both around 500,000 barrels of oil per day. So these are the biggest all shale plays in the U.S. We'll talk about in a minute where the Permian is going. Next, let's look at U.S. oil production. So most of y'all don't realize U.S. oil production bottomed out about 5 million barrels a day about 10 years ago. You can see it's been on a significant climb, and we just hit 12 million barrels a day recently. If you look at EIA estimates, just recently we're at 12.2 million barrels a day. So we bypassed in the last 12 months both Saudi Arabia and Russia. What's interesting, 8.5 million barrels a day of this 12 of oil is from unconventional shale. And so can you imagine, I'll talk about it on the last slide, but can you imagine if it wasn't for the shale revolution where the price of oil would be? Can anybody guess here? If you take out 8.5 million barrels a day, where would it have come from? What do you think the price of oil would be? Anybody? $175, John? Okay, you're probably right. I always say like $200, maybe $200 a barrel. So just imagine if it wasn't for the shale revolution, take 8.5 million barrels a day off the market, where would the price of oil be today? So it's still climbing, and some of y'all saw me quoted in a speech up in New York recently, and I still think it'll go to about 17 million barrels a day, and before it's starting to slow at that point in time. You look at the rig count, the horizontal rig count, you can see it peaked in 2014. But what's interesting, we're getting more for less. We got less rigs running. You see the horizontal rig count is staying around between 800 and 900. It's off a little bit lately. And the reason it's off is that we have, and a lot of the students ask me this question because everybody reads the Wall Street Journal. There's a change in investor mentality with investors. So most oil and gas companies are budgeting off $50 oil or $58 to $60 Brent. And what we used to do is when we see the price go above, we would add more rigs. Now investors are saying, give some of us back. So give it back in regard to dividends, give it back in regard to share buyback. So more and more companies are going to call it a free cash flow model, where we're budgeting based on a lower price. And so we're keeping our production growth steady. And then as we see oil prices go up, we're going to improve the balance sheets. And during the down cycles, we'll buy back stock cheap. And then we're going to increase dividends. So that's a new model to get more investor interest into the energy stocks. Because what's happened is that it used to be 13% of the S&P 500 was energy. Today, it's down to 5%. And so people are buying, of course, Google, Netflix, Amazon, and so the other stocks that have really taken off over the last several years. So there's been less and less interest in the energy stocks. And so we're trying to change the mindset. And that's one of the main reasons you're seeing the rig count go down when you see the price of oil has gone up about $18 in the last just few months with Saudi Arabia and Russia with their agreement. A couple slides on Pioneer. I was fortunate enough to be trained here at the university, so I give them a lot of credit many, many years ago. But we were able to buy a tremendous position in the Midland Basin. We're by far the most dominant player in the Midland Basin. And we have almost 700,000 acres, and we have 10 billion barrels of resource just under our acreage. And this is recoverable oil. We're only getting about 8% of the oil out of the ground. And you can see I get asked all the questions, what inning are we in regard to technology? And you can see every year for the last 4 years, our wells are getting better and better and better. And so technology has played a very, very important part in research in that regard. So I tell people we're still in the 5th or 6th inning. And then you look at our oil mix, our liquid mix, we're about 74%. And then you can see these are all the wells drilled in the Midland Basin over the last 2 years. You can see that Pioneer is on top with the best type curve. So it shows that we have some of the best people, some of the best rock, and some of the best technology. So these are all the operators and all the wells in the Midland Basin over the last 2 years. In regard to break-even, break-even is an important word. So in regard to break-even prices, the Midland Basin and the Delaware Basin, you can see, are very at the low end of the curve, somewhere between the low 20s and $30. So that's why we're able to compete with Saudi Arabia. If you look at Saudi Arabia, their break-even is probably down around $5 break-even. But when you look at a country, they need $80 oil and Brent just to break even as a country. So you have to look at the break-even price of each country inside OPEC to get their true break-even price. Activity, we've seen recent announcements by the majors for the first time in probably, I'm going to say 40 years. The majors are now leading in regard to activity in the Permian Basin. Exxon announced they're going to 55 rigs by the end of 19. And then Chevron, it shows 18 rigs, but you have to combine them with Anadarko at 11 rigs. And so Chevron will be the second largest operator. They're both saying they're going to 1.9 million barrels a day equivalent in the Permian Basin from their current rate. So they're basically going to triple by 2024 with their recent announcements. And they both announced in their recent analyst meetings up in New York that the Permian Basin is the #1 field in the world to make investments. So a total change over the last several years. But you can see there's over 125,000 locations in the Permian Basin. This is only 55%. These are all public companies, so you can go to the IR material and get this information. And so you probably double that if you look at all the private companies, and there's over 110 companies operating in the Permian Basin. So there's probably over 200,000 drilling locations. So the field's going to, I get asked, how long is the shale revolution going to last? The Sprayberry field was founded in 1946. It's been producing since then. The first well was drilled in 1946. It'll be producing well past everybody in this room's lifetime, I promise you. In regard to total shale, you can see that the Permian Basin, this is a projection from Sanford Bernstein, a New York research firm. They're showing that we're going to get up to over 8 million barrels a day. Just add the two bottom curves. So the two bottom curves get up over, that's the Midland and the Delaware. So that gets over 8 million barrels a day. So if you remember, we're at 4.2 million barrels a day now. So we're going from 4.2 to 8. And they're assuming it's going to flatten out. I still predict it'll continue to grow at that point in time. And you can see what happens with the other plays, the Eagle Ford and the Bakken. They expand a little bit over the next 2 or 3 years, but they begin to flatten out. And so this is all U.S. shale. If you remember, I told you we were about 8.5 million barrels a day. So these people are predicting we'll be up almost close to 12 million barrels a day of unconventional. You look at the gas side, so this is associated gas from all of these oil shales. So associated gas, you again look at the two bottom curves. So the Permian Basin is going up to 38 BCF a day. And so we're only producing about 13 to 14 BCF a day. And so you can see the problem that we have. I'll be asked a question later because a lot of y'all have seen that right now gas is free in the Permian Basin. So as a state of Texas, it's a big black eye. It's a black eye on the industry. We got to figure out how to solve the problems that we're flaring. Most of it is being flared. Some is being vented, but we're flaring and venting somewhere between 0.5 and 1 B a day. And the problem's going to get worse. The reason is we're not building enough pipelines, gas pipelines. We're building enough oil pipelines, but not gas. The Marcellus and the Utica will get up to about 50 BCF a day. I don't have it on here, but I know the numbers. So you can see associated gas from the shale plays. You add Marcellus and Utica, unconventional gas will be over 100 BCF a day. These are the range of estimates, public estimates from the Permian Basin. There's a couple that get over 9 million barrels a day, just oil in the Permian Basin. Again, we're at 4.2 million barrels a day now. In regard to takeaway capacity, the problem is Permian Basin has grown too quick, too fast. And you can see where the red line hits the slope of the production curve, we have problems. And so what happens is the price of oil changes in West Texas. But you can see the number of pipelines. We're adding about 3 million barrels a day of pipeline capacity. Most of it's coming on late this year. You can see our next problem is in 2024. We are exporting oil all over the world today. Pioneer helped lead the effort, getting President Obama to lift. Crude oil was the only hydrocarbon that we couldn't export. We could export LNG, we could export coal, we could export all the products coming from oil, but we couldn't export oil. That goes back to the Arab embargo in 1973. And so we got it lifted finally in 2016 as he left office. And now we're exporting over 3 million barrels a day now around the world. Most of it's going to Asia, about half going to Asia of our exports and about half going to Europe. You can see here we did hit a record at 3.2, but it averaged about 1.8 million barrels a day. Gas exports, we're exporting 3.5 BCF a day. We'll be going to 9 to 10 BCF a day, as you see on this next slide. So we're exporting at 3.5 to 4 BCF a day. The rest of the projects will be on by middle of 2020. So we'll be exporting about 10 BCF a day. There's 2 more projects that have been announced by both Shale and Exxon, but they won't be on until 2025 and 2026. What's happened with petrochemicals? So the petrochemical industry, they essentially left about 20, 25 years ago, and everything was being made overseas. But with the fact that we have cheap products now, especially with the rich gas coming out of these shale plays, and also what's happened out of the Marcellus, we've had a tremendous boom in the Gulf Coast, both Texas and Louisiana, and the petrochemical boom. Over $117 billion worth of projects being invested in. And then lastly, the benefits of the shale revolution. Number one, we surpassed Russia and Saudi Arabia. Provides the world with really lower oil prices than we would have had. Less domestic pricing cyclicality. It also, what's important, it reduces our dependence upon foreign oil. So I've been told by some of the ex-presidents that they had a standing order if any major OPEC country in the Middle East was invaded by anybody, we would have to send troops immediately to protect those oil sources. Because of what unconventional oil has done, they have removed that order. So it's not a must that we have to. So it gives the Congress and the President time to think about it because of what's happened with the fact that we have reduced imports. We don't have to rush out and send military troops already to protect foreign oil because of what's happened. Our natural gas production has reached an all-time high. Obviously, it's made electricity cheap for everybody in the U.S. In regard to, we have very low LNG prices. People are trying to use the U.S. index to price their liquefied natural gas on. And then lastly, in regard to, it's lowered CO2 emissions by reducing our dependence upon coal. It returns, and you've heard Secretary of State recently talk about it, we return as an energy superpower for the first time in a very, very long time. When you're the largest producer of energy in the world, you become an energy superpower. It reduces the trade deficit with significant exports, strengthens, obviously, national security. You wouldn't believe the countries that we talk to in regard to exporting to Europe. They don't have to be dependent upon Russia for the rest 100% of their oil or 100% of their natural gas. They can now rely on U.S. oil. They can now rely on U.S. LNG. Significant job creation, and obviously federal and state tax revenue generation. So it's been a tremendous revolution. Most of you are graduating right in the early stages of it. It's only been going on for about 8 years. So it's going to go on for another 50 to 75 years. I get asked whether or not it's going to move around the rest of the world. Geologically, the shale is there around the rest of the world. They just have to get competitive with their cost structure. So my opinion is it will continue to move around the entire world, the shale revolution. I will now turn it back over to John. Thank you, John.